My rich CEO wife left me with our 2-year-old child for my own brother. For years later, she was shocked to see the child behind me, a mini version of her calling her biggest rival mom. So here's the thing about having your life blow up in spectacular fashion. It doesn't happen like in the movies. There's no dramatic soundtrack, no slow-motion shots of tears rolling down cheeks, and definitely no heartfelt monologue about how love conquers all. Nope. When my marriage imploded 4 years ago, it was more like watching a really expensive car crash in complete silence. Except the car was my entire existence, and I was somehow both the driver and the guy getting run over. My name is Marcus Hale, and let me tell you, that name used to mean something around here. Not in a "I'm so important of my own Wikipedia page" way, but in a decent, respectable, "hey, that's the Mary Eleanor Whitman" sort of way. Yeah, that Eleanor Whitman, the one whose face graced the cover of Forbes twice, who could make or break startups with a single phone call, and who looked like she stepped out of a boardroom power fantasy. She was my wife, the mother of my son, and apparently, the woman who thought my brother Julian was a significant upgrade. 4 years ago, on a Tuesday that started like any other Tuesday, coffee too strong, tie slightly crooked, Aiden finger-painting his breakfast more than eating it, Eleanor walked into our kitchen wearing that stone-cold expression she usually reserved for firing executives. She placed a manila folder on our granite countertop, the same countertop she'd insisted we needed because image matters, Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on me then, and it sure as hell isn't lost on me now. "Divorce papers," she said, like she was announcing the weather forecast. No preamble, no "we need to talk," no "it's not you, it's me" bullcrap. Just 2 words that managed to compress my entire world into something small enough to fit in a legal document. I remember staring at that folder like it might spontaneously combust if I looked at it hard enough. Aiden was babbling happily in his high chair, completely oblivious to the fact that his mom was about to nuke his family structure from orbit. He was 2 years old, chubby-cheeked, and thought the world was made of Cheerios and peekaboo games. Poor kid had no clue his mother was about to ghost him harder than a Tinder date who just realized you still live with your parents. "Julian and I," she started, but I held up my hand because honestly, I didn't need the gory details. I could fill in the blanks myself. Thank you very much. My little brother, the guy who used to follow me around like a lost puppy, had apparently decided that stealing my wife was the ultimate way to prove he'd finally grown up. Family loyalty? What's that? Blood being thicker than water? More like blood being thinner than designer cologne and expensive wine. The whole thing was so perfectly Eleanor, efficient, calculated, and colder than a penguin's backside. She didn't cry. Hell, I'm not even sure she blinked. She just stood there in her power suit, looking like she was about to deliver a quarterly earnings report instead of demolishing a marriage. Her heels, those ridiculously expensive Christian Louboutin things she loved so much, clicked against our tile floor like a judge's gavel, each tap sealing another nail in our relationship's coffin. "What about Aiden?" I asked, because someone had to think about the little guy who was currently trying to stick Cheerios up his nose. She glanced at our son like she'd just remembered he existed. "He'll be fine. Children are resilient." Resilient. Like he was a houseplant that could bounce back from a little neglect with enough sunlight and water. This woman had carried him for 9 months, been there for his first steps, his first words, and now she was talking about him like he was a stock option she could just cash out. I signed those papers because what else was I supposed to do? Fight for a woman who clearly didn't want to be fought for? Beg someone to love me who'd already decided I wasn't worth the effort? Pride's a funny thing. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and complete humiliation, and sometimes it's the thing that saves your dignity when everything else is falling apart. The day she moved out was surreal. Watching Eleanor pack her life into designer suitcases while Aiden napped in his crib felt like watching a magician's trick in reverse. Instead of making something appear, everything was disappearing. Her clothes, her books, those ridiculously expensive face creams that cost more than my monthly car payment. She worked with the mechanical precision of someone dismantling a business deal, not a home. She didn't say goodbye to Aiden, just kissed him on the forehead while he slept and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she was gone, heels clicking down our driveway for the last time, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of her perfume and a house that suddenly felt way too big for just a man and his toddler. The whispers started almost immediately. You know how it is in social circles. News travels faster than gossip at a church potluck. She traded up, they said, like marriages were stock portfolios and Julian was some kind of blue-chip investment. Can you blame her? Others whispered behind manicured hands at country club brunches. Julian's got that family money now, and Marcus. Well, what does Marcus have? What did I have? I had a 2-year-old who cried himself to sleep asking for mama. I had a house full of memories and a bank account that suddenly looked a lot smaller without Eleanor's CEO salary padding it. I had a brother who couldn't look me in the eye at family gatherings and parents who kept saying things like, maybe this is for the best, and Eleanor's got to think about her career. But you know what else I had? I had a little boy who needed me, who depended on me, who looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build something new from the ashes of everything that had burned down. Because here's what I learned about rock bottom. It's actually a pretty solid foundation to build on. You know what's worse than having your wife walk out on you? Having your own flesh and blood be the reason she's walking in the first place. If divorce is like getting punched in the gut, then having your brother steal your wife is like getting that punch delivered by someone wearing brass knuckles dipped in lemon juice and broken dreams. Julian Marcus Hale. Yeah, we share the same middle name because our parents thought that was meaningful, had been shadowing my every move since we were kids. 2 years younger, 3 inches shorter, and about 1,000 times more insecure. Julian spent our entire childhood trying to prove he was better than his big brother at literally everything. Sports? He joined every team I was on, usually riding the bench while I started. Academics? Dude practically gave himself an ulcer trying to beat my GPA, falling short by exactly 0.2 points senior year. Girls? Well, let's just say Julian had a habit of asking out every girl who showed even passing interest in me, like he was conducting some weird social experiment in secondhand romance. I used to think it was harmless sibling rivalry, the kind of thing therapists probably have fancy names for, but most families just chalk up to boys being boys. Hell, I even felt sorry for the guy sometimes. There's something genuinely pathetic about watching someone work so hard to live in your shadow that they forget to build their own life. Julian was like a professional understudy who never got his shot at the leading role, until he decided to write his own script and cast my wife as his co-star. The signs were there, of course. Looking back now with the crystal-clear vision of hindsight, I can see all the little moments that should have sent up red flags bigger than the ones they wave at NASCAR races. Julian started showing up at family dinners more often right around the time Eleanor began working those insane CEO hours. Just checking in on you guys, he'd say, settling into my recliner like he owned the place while Eleanor was stuck at the office until midnight dealing with some corporate crisis. He'd play with Aiden, and I actually thought it was sweet. Uncle Julian being so involved, so caring. What a stand-up guy, right? Wrong. Turns out he was conducting reconnaissance missions, figuring out the weak spots in my marriage like some kind of domestic spy. How's Eleanor handling the stress? And, you guys seem tired lately. Was him probing for cracks he could slip his crowbar into. The real kicker? He started showing up when I wasn't home. Eleanor mentioned it casually one night while we were getting ready for bed. Oh, Julian stopped by today. Brought some flowers for the kitchen table. Flowers. For my kitchen table. In my house. For my wife. And I just said, that's nice, like a complete moron. Because who suspects their own brother of running some elaborate seduction scheme? Julian had this way of making Eleanor laugh that I'd forgotten I used to do. He'd tell these stories about his latest business ventures. The guy bounced between startups like a pinball, never quite sticking the landing, but always convinced the next one would be his big break. Eleanor ate it up. Here was someone who understood her world, who spoke fluent MBA and could discuss quarterly projections over dinner without making her feel like she was dumbing things down. And me? I was just the husband who asked if she wanted me to DVR her favorite show and whether she remembered to pick up milk on the way home. Real riveting stuff, Marcus. No wonder she started looking at Julian like he was some kind of entrepreneurial prophet instead of the guy who once called me crying because he couldn't figure out how to use a washing machine. The family dynamics shifted so gradually I didn't notice until it was too late. Mom started inviting Julian to more things. Dad began asking his opinion about investments and business decisions. Even our cousin's wedding seating chart somehow ended up with Julian at the main family table while I got bumped to the kids section. Okay, not literally, but close enough to make the point. It was like watching a corporate takeover happen in slow motion. Except the company being acquired was my position as the successful Hale brother. Our parents' reaction to the whole Eleanor situation really showed me where I stood in the family pecking order. When the divorce papers were signed and the dust settled, Mom's first concern wasn't, "How are you holding up?" or "What can we do to help with Aiden?" Nope. It was, "Marcus, you need to think about what's best for everyone here." Translation: don't make this awkward for us because Julian's new girlfriend happens to be rich and influential, and we'd rather not lose our invitations to fancy charity galas. Dad was even worse. He actually had the audacity to sit me down for a heart-to-heart that went something like this. "Son, sometimes in life we have to accept that things don't work out the way we planned. Eleanor's a good woman, and Julian's finally found his direction. Maybe this is how it was supposed to be. How it was supposed to be. Like my marriage was some kind of cosmic mix-up that the universe finally got around to correcting." Family dinners became exercises in diplomatic immunity. Everyone walking on eggshells, pretending like the elephant in the room wasn't wearing a sign that said, "Julian stole Marcus's wife," and everyone's okay with it. Julian would show up with Eleanor on his arm, and she'd play the role of the gracious new girlfriend, bringing wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and complimenting Mom's cooking like she hadn't eaten the same meals at this same table for years as my wife. The worst part? Watching Aiden navigate this minefield of family politics at 2 years old. The kid would see Eleanor and run toward her with that pure, uncomplicated love that toddlers have, only to be gently redirected by Julian like some kind of human traffic cone. "Hey buddy, come see Uncle Julian," he'd say, scooping up my son while Eleanor maintained her polite distance. My own child was being managed around his mother because it was too complicated for everyone else to handle. But here's what really broke my heart. Aiden started asking for her every night. "Where Mama go?" became his favorite bedtime question, and I had no answer that made sense to a 2-year-old brain. How do you explain to a toddler that Mommy decided Daddy wasn't good enough anymore, so she went to live with Uncle Julian instead? How do you make that sound like anything other than abandonment? That's when I made the promise that's kept me sane ever since. I would be everything Aiden needed. Father, mother, cheerleader, teacher, protector, whatever it took. Because Julian might have won Eleanor, but I wasn't about to let him win my son's future too. Turns out, nobody prepares you for single fatherhood by handing you a manual titled, "So Your Wife Ran Off with Your Brother," a comprehensive guide to not screwing up your kid. Nope. You just get thrown into the deep end of the parenting pool wearing concrete boots and told to figure out how to swim. And let me tell you, those first few months were like trying to perform brain surgery while riding a unicycle during an earthquake. Messy, terrifying, and with a high probability of spectacular failure. The nights were the worst. Aiden would wake up crying at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., sometimes every hour on the hour like he had some internal alarm clock set to maximum chaos. He'd stand in his crib, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks, calling Mama, Mama, in that heartbreaking toddler voice that could probably make hardened criminals weep. And there I was, stumbling around in my boxers and a ratty t-shirt, trying to figure out whether he needed a diaper change, a bottle, or just wanted someone to hold him until the scary feelings went away. The diaper situation alone nearly broke me. Eleanor had always handled that particular parental duty with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit crew, while I'd been relegated to the hold-him-still role. Suddenly, I was flying solo. And let me just say, 2-year-olds have an uncanny ability to turn a simple diaper change into what looks like a crime scene. There's poop in places you didn't even know poop could reach. I went through more baby wipes than a germophobic surgeon, and I'm pretty sure I single-handedly kept the Pampers company in business during those early months. Breakfast became my daily Everest. How hard could it be to feed a toddler, right? Wrong. So incredibly wrong. Aiden had apparently inherited Eleanor's discerning palate, but lacked her ability to articulate exactly what was wrong with every single thing I put in front of him. Scrambled eggs? No. Cheerios? Yucky. Toast cut into triangles? Complete meltdown because apparently it was supposed to be cut into squares. Marcus, get with the program. I learned to pack his lunch for daycare through trial and error, mostly error. The first week, I sent him with what I thought was a well-balanced meal: peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, and some of those little crackers shaped like fish. Turns out the daycare had a strict no-nuts policy that I'd somehow missed in my post-divorce fog. Aiden didn't like apples unless they were cut into precisely quarter-inch pieces. And those crackers were apparently too salty, according to Miss Jennifer, the daycare teacher who seemed to have opinions about everything. But here's the thing about kids: they're surprisingly adaptable, and they forgive you for a lot of mistakes as long as you keep showing up. Aiden stopped asking for Eleanor every night around month 3. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It just gradually faded away like a song getting quieter until you can't hear it anymore. Instead, he started climbing into my bed during thunderstorms, his little body fitting perfectly against my side while he whispered, "Daddy." I scared. That's when I realized we were building something new together, something that didn't exist when Eleanor was around. It wasn't better or worse than before, just different. More us. I learned to braid his hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight, my big clumsy fingers gradually figuring out how to weave those silky strands into something that wouldn't get him made fun of at daycare. I discovered that bedtime stories work better when you do different voices for all the characters. Even if your attempt at sounding like a princess makes you sound more like a chain-smoking truck driver. Mrs. Turner from across the street became my unlikely savior. Picture this: 70-something widow with gray hair always in perfect curls, cardigans in every color of the rainbow, and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from raising 4 kids and burying a husband. She started showing up at my door around dinner time, usually carrying a casserole dish and wearing that look that said, "I'm helping whether you want it or not." "Marcus, honey," she'd say, bustling past me into the kitchen like she owned the place. "You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in weeks. And that boy needs vegetables, not whatever sugar-coated cereal you've been giving him for dinner." She wasn't wrong. My idea of a balanced meal had devolved into anything that came in a box and could be prepared in under 5 minutes. Mrs. Turner didn't just feed us. She schooled me in the art of actual parenting. She taught me that kids need routines, that bedtime isn't a suggestion, and that because I said so is a perfectly valid answer to a 2-year-old's 17th why of the day. She showed me how to check for fevers properly, which medicines were okay for toddlers, and that sometimes a good cry, for both father and child, was exactly what the situation called for. "Marcus," she told me one evening while we watched Aiden play with blocks on the living room floor, "children don't remember the money their parents had, or the fancy vacations, or the big house. They remember who stayed. They remember who showed up when they were scared, who kissed their scraped knees, who read them stories even when they were too tired to see straight." Those words hit me harder than Eleanor's divorce papers ever did. Because Mrs. Turner was right, I was staying. I was showing up. Every single day, whether I felt like it or not, whether I knew what I was doing or not, I was there. And slowly, gradually, that started to feel like enough. Aiden began calling me Daddy Mama around his 3rd birthday, which was both hilarious and heartbreaking. I'd catch him having conversations with his toys where he'd be both voices. "Don't worry, Teddy. Daddy Mama will fix it." Like he'd figured out that I was doing double duty and wanted to acknowledge it in his sweet, innocent way. We developed our own traditions. Saturday morning pancakes where he got to help measure ingredients and inevitably got flour absolutely everywhere. Sunday afternoon walks to the park where he'd collect rocks and leaves like they were precious treasures. Bedtime songs that I made up on the spot, usually featuring adventures of Super Aiden and his trusty sidekick Captain Daddy. The bills piled up, sure. My bank account looked like a sad joke without Eleanor's income. But every night when I tucked Aiden into bed and he wrapped his little arms around my neck and whispered, "Love you, Daddy," I knew we were going to be okay. Different than I'd planned, smaller than I'd expected, but okay. Life has this twisted sense of humor where it drops the most important people into your world at the exact moment you're not looking for them. I mean, who meets their future somebody while chasing a runaway toddler through a community fair? Apparently, I do. And apparently, that somebody happens to be the one person in the business world who could make Eleanor break out in stress hives just by existing. The annual Riverside Community Fair was one of those wholesome small-town events that makes you feel like you're living in a Norman Rockwell painting. You know, all apple pies, face painting, and kids hopped up on cotton candy running around like tiny sugar-powered tornadoes. Aiden was 3 by then, And he'd hit that magical age where he had the energy of a caffeinated squirrel and the attention span of a goldfish with ADHD. Stay close, buddy, I told him as we navigated through the crowd of families. But talking to a 3-year-old about staying close is like trying to negotiate with a hurricane. 1 second he was holding my hand, marveling at the balloon animals, and the next second he was gone, vanished into the crowd like some kind of miniature Houdini. Panic set in faster than you could say stranger danger. I'm scanning the crowd, calling his name, doing that parent thing where you try to look calm, while internally having a complete meltdown. Other parents were giving me those sympathetic looks that said, "Been there, buddy." But sympathy doesn't help when your kid has disappeared into a sea of people and you're starting to imagine all the horrible things that could happen at a community fair. That's when I heard it. Aiden's distinctive giggle coming from the direction of the Business Expo tent. Because of course my kid would wander into the one area of the fair designed for adults. I followed the sound like a heat-seeking missile, weaving between booths advertising everything from insurance companies to local bakeries. I found him sitting cross-legged on the floor of a sleek tech company booth, completely mesmerized by some kind of interactive display, while a woman in a sharp business suit crouched next to him, patiently explaining how the touchscreen worked. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light, genuine laugh lines around her eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Aiden," I called out, relief flooding through me as I rushed over. "Jesus, buddy, you scared me to death." The woman looked up, and I got my first real look at Serena Clark, though I didn't know her name yet. She had these warm brown eyes that seemed to actually see you, not through you like Eleanor always did. Her smile was real, not the smile I'd grown accustomed to living with. "This little guy yours?" she asked, ruffling Aiden's hair affectionately. "He's been keeping me company. We've been discussing the finer points of user interface design, haven't we, Aiden?" Aiden nodded seriously, like UI design was totally normal conversation material for a 3-year-old. "She's got games on her computer, Daddy. And look." He pointed to his shoes, both perfectly tied with neat little bows. His shoelace was dragging, she explained, standing up and dusting off her skirt. "Safety hazard in a crowd like this. I'm Serena, by the way. Serena Clark." The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Serena Clark, Eleanor's biggest business rival. The woman whose tech company had been steadily eating away at Eleanor's market share for the past 2 years. I'd heard that name mentioned around our dinner table with the kind of venom usually reserved for war criminals and people who don't return their shopping carts. "Marcus," I said, shaking her hand. "Marcus Hale. And thank you, seriously. This guy's got a talent for disappearing acts." "Hale," she repeated, and I saw the moment of recognition flash across her face. But instead of the awkwardness I expected, she just smiled wider. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Marcus Hale. And you too, Aiden." She reached into a small basket on her display table and pulled out a cookie shaped like a computer, one of those promotional items companies hand out at these things. Would it be okay if Aiden had one of these? They're from Miller's Bakery downtown, nothing fancy. The fact that she asked permission instead of just handing it over told me everything I needed to know about Serena Clark. Eleanor would have assumed it was fine, or more likely, wouldn't have offered in the first place because sticky-fingered toddlers and tech displays don't mix well in most people's minds. "Cookie," Aiden exclaimed, reaching for it with the enthusiasm only a 3-year-old can muster for sugar-based treats. "What do you say, buddy?" I prompted. "Thank you," Aiden chirped, already taking a massive bite. "He's got good manners," Serena observed, watching Aiden devour the cookie. "An excellent taste in technology demonstrations. He figured out the touch screen faster than most of the adults who've stopped by today." "He's pretty smart," I said, pride creeping into my voice the way it always did when someone complimented Aiden. "Takes after his old man, obviously." Serena laughed, not the polite business laugh Eleanor had perfected, but a real, honest-to-God belly laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Obviously. So what brings you two to the fair today?" "Besides advanced UI research, of course. Just trying to tire him out before bedtime," I admitted. "Single parenting hack number 47. Exhaust them with fun so they actually sleep through the night." "Single parenting, huh?" There wasn't pity in her voice, just genuine interest. "That's got to be challenging." "It has its moments," I said, watching Aiden explore the interactive display with the focused intensity of a tiny scientist. But we make it work, don't we, buddy? Uh-huh. Aiden mumbled around his cookie, completely absorbed in making colorful patterns appear on the screen. We stood there for a while, watching him play, making small talk about the fair, about her company, about nothing particularly important. But there was something comfortable about it, something easy that I hadn't felt in a long time. Serena didn't seem to be in a hurry to get rid of us, even though I was sure she had important business-wise things to do. You know, she said eventually, I've got a whole box of these cookies, and Aiden seems to really like them. Maybe I could stop by sometime with more. I live just across town. The offer caught me off guard. This successful businesswoman, Eleanor's rival, no less, wanted to visit us? Wanted to bring my kid cookies? That would be great, I heard myself saying. Aiden would love that. Wouldn't you, buddy? Can she bring more games? Aiden asked hopefully. We'll see what we can do, Serena said with a wink. You know what's weird about falling for someone? It happens so gradually that you don't even realize it's happening until you're already neck-deep in feelings and wondering how the hell you got there. With Eleanor, everything had been intense and dramatic from day one. Fireworks and grand gestures, and that whole swept-off-my-feet romantic comedy nonsense. With Serena, it was more like watching a sunrise, so subtle and natural that you almost miss the exact moment when everything becomes brighter. It started with the cookies, just like she'd promised. 3 days after the fair, my doorbell rang during Aiden's afternoon snack time, and there she was, standing on my front porch with a bakery box and a smile that could probably power a small town. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater instead of her business attire, and somehow that made her even more beautiful, like she'd shed her professional armor and was just being herself. Special delivery for a certain tech-savvy 3-year-old, she announced, holding up the box. Aiden practically launched himself at the door when he heard her voice. Serena, did you bring the computer cookies? Even better, she said, kneeling down to his eye level. I brought regular cookies and a surprise. The surprise turned out to be a kid-friendly tablet loaded with educational games. Nothing fancy or expensive, just thoughtful. She'd taken the time to figure out what a 3-year-old might actually enjoy, which was more consideration than most people in my life had shown Aiden since Eleanor left. You really didn't have to do this, I said, but she waved off my protests. I wanted to. Besides, I had fun at the fair. It's been a while since I got to explain technology to someone who was genuinely excited about it, instead of just trying to figure out how to monetize it. That became our thing. Serena would stop by after work sometimes, ostensibly to see Aiden, but staying to chat with me over coffee while my son played with whatever new educational toy or game she'd brought. She never showed up empty-handed, but it wasn't the kind of show-off generosity that screams, "Look how much money I can spend." It was more like she actually listened when Aiden mentioned liking dinosaurs or trucks, or whatever his obsession of the week happened to be. The first time she stayed for dinner was an accident. She'd arrived just as I was attempting to make spaghetti and meatballs, emphasis on attempting. The smoke detector was going off. Aiden was crying because the noise scared him, and I was standing in my kitchen holding a pan of what looked like charcoal briquettes that used to be meatballs. Need some help? Serena asked, appearing in my kitchen doorway like some kind of domestic angel. Unless you're secretly a chef, I think we're ordering pizza tonight, I said, tossing the ruined meatballs into the trash. I'm not secretly a chef, but I do make a mean grilled cheese, she offered. And I saw you've got tomato soup in the pantry. Comfort food classic. She rolled up her sleeves and took over my kitchen with the kind of easy confidence that made it clear she actually knew what she was doing. Within 20 minutes, we were sitting around my dining table eating grilled cheese sandwiches cut into perfect triangles and tomato soup that didn't come from a can. Aiden was in heaven, dunking his sandwich into his soup and chattering about his day at daycare, while Serena listened like every word was fascinating. This is really good, I said, and I wasn't just talking about the food. It is, she agreed, and the way she looked around my slightly chaotic dining room. Aiden's artwork taped to the walls, toy cars scattered on the sideboard, that lingering smell of burnt meatballs in the air, made me think she meant it. School events were where Serena really proved she was different from Eleanor. My ex-wife had treated Aiden's daycare functions like business obligations. Show up, smile for the required photos, make polite conversation with the other parents, and leave as soon as socially acceptable. Serena actually enjoyed them. The first school play she attended was some kind of vegetable-themed production where Aiden played a carrot. Not the lead carrot. Mind you, just a regular background carrot with 2 lines and a costume that made him look like an orange traffic cone. Eleanor would have checked her phone through the whole thing and complained afterward about how long it took. Serena, on the other hand, cheered louder than anyone when Aiden delivered his lines, took about 50 photos, and afterward told him he was the best carrot she'd ever seen on stage. She meant it, too. You could see it in her eyes, the way she looked at him like he'd just performed Shakespeare instead of saying, "Carrots are crunchy and orange." The late-night fever incidents really sealed the deal for me, though. Kids get sick. It's like a law of nature or something. And when they get sick at 2 a.m., it's always worse because everything feels more dramatic and scary in the dark. The first time Aiden spiked a fever in the middle of the night after Serena had become a regular part of our lives. I was pacing the living room with a thermometer in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to remember what temperature meant I needed to call the doctor. My phone buzzed with a text from Serena. "Saw your light on from across the street. Everything okay?" Before I could even respond, she was knocking on my door, wearing pajama pants and a hoodie, carrying a bag that turned out to be full of every kid medicine known to humanity. "Mrs. Turner told me Aiden seemed a little off today when she picked him up from daycare," she explained, taking the thermometer from my shaking hands. "Figured you might need backup if he got worse tonight." She stayed until dawn, taking turns with me checking his temperature, bringing him sips of water, reading him stories in whispered voices when he couldn't sleep. When morning came and his fever finally broke, I found her crashed on my couch, still wearing those pajama pants, looking more beautiful than Eleanor ever had in all her designer glory. The bike riding lessons were what made Aiden decide she was staying for good, I think. I'd been putting off teaching him because, honestly, I was terrified he'd get hurt on my watch. But Serena showed up one Saturday morning with a small red bike, training wheels already attached, and a helmet covered in dinosaur stickers. "Every kid needs to learn to ride a bike," she said simply. "And every kid deserves someone cheering them on when they do." We spent the entire afternoon in the park, Serena running alongside Aiden while I held the back of the bike seat, both of us encouraging him to keep pedaling, to not give up, to trust that we wouldn't let him fall. When he finally rode those few wobbling feet on his own, the pure joy on his face was matched only by the pride on Serena's. That night, as I was tucking Aiden into bed, he grabbed my hand with that serious expression kids get when they're about to say something important. "Daddy? Serena's like my real mom, isn't she?" The words hit me like a freight train. Not because they weren't true, but because they were so completely, utterly true that hearing them out loud made everything crystal clear. "Yeah, buddy," I whispered. "She really is. Some nights stick with you forever, burned into your memory like a brand you can't scrub off no matter how hard you try." The Riverside Children's Hospital Charity Gala was supposed to be one of those boring but necessary community events. You know, the kind where local business owners write checks to feel good about themselves while eating overpriced chicken and making small talk about tax write-offs. I hadn't planned on going, but Serena had bought a table for her company and asked if Aiden and I wanted to join her. "It'll be fun," she'd said. "Plus, Aiden loves getting dressed up." She wasn't wrong about that last part. My 6-year-old son looked like a miniature James Bond in his little black suit, complete with a bow tie that he'd insisted on tying himself. The result was charmingly lopsided, but he wore it with the confidence of a kid who knew he looked sharp. Serena was stunning in a midnight blue dress that somehow managed to be elegant and approachable at the same time, which pretty much summed her up perfectly. The hotel ballroom was done up in that generic fancy way that screams expensive but forgettable. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The usual suspects were all there. Local politicians glad-handing donors, business leaders networking over cocktails, and enough jewelry to stock a small Tiffany's store. Aiden was being his charming self, working the crowd like a tiny politician. He'd gotten pretty good at these social situations over the past couple of years, mainly because Serena had taught him that grown-up events were just parties where people forgot how to have fun. She'd slip him crackers from her purse and let him color on the back of programs while the speakers droned on about fundraising goals and community impact. I was standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching Serena explain something to Aiden that was making him giggle when the energy in the room shifted. You know that feeling when something changes, but you can't quite put your finger on what? Like when the temperature drops right before a storm, or when you hear a sound that doesn't quite belong. That's when I saw them. Eleanor Whitman Hale, though I guess she'd probably dropped the Hale part by now, swept into the ballroom like she owned the place, which, knowing Eleanor, she probably did. For years had been kind to her. Her blonde hair was shorter now, styled in one of those expensive cuts that looks effortless but probably costs more than most people's rent. Her dress was designer everything. Probably cost enough to fund a small country's education budget. She looked powerful, successful, and completely untouchable. Julian was right behind her, playing the role of devoted boyfriend with the kind of practiced ease that made my stomach turn. He'd filled out some in the years since our family imploded, traded his perpetual startup casual look for the kind of tailored suits that whispered, "I've made it," to anyone within earshot. They moved through the crowd like celebrities, stopping to air-kiss society matrons and shake hands with local power brokers. I should have grabbed Aiden and Serena and gotten the hell out of there. Should have made some excuse about babysitter issues or early morning meetings and bolted for the exit like a smart person. But I couldn't move. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion. Horrifying, but impossible to look away from. Eleanor was scanning the crowd with that calculated gaze she'd perfected over years of working rooms like this, probably cataloging potential business contacts and social climbing opportunities. Her eyes swept past the champagne fountain, past the silent auction tables loaded with vacation packages and spa treatments, past the dance floor where a few brave couples were swaying to generic jazz music. And then they found me. For a split second, time stopped. Eleanor's perfectly composed expression flickered, just for an instant, like a glitch in a computer program. I saw surprise, maybe even shock, flash across her features before the CEO mask snapped back into place. But it was too late. I'd seen the crack in her armor, the moment when she realized her perfectly orchestrated evening had just gotten complicated. But here's the thing, she wasn't really looking at me. Not really. Her gaze shifted, searching, and I realized with a jolt of understanding what she was looking for. Who she was looking for. Aiden was still standing next to Serena's chair, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding across the ballroom. He was showing her something in the program, pointing at pictures and chattering away in that animated way 6-year-olds have when they're excited about something. Serena was listening with that patient attention she always gave him, nodding seriously at whatever profound observation he was sharing. That's when Eleanor saw him. I watched the color drain from her face like someone had pulled a plug. For years of separation, for years of building a new life with Julian, for years of pretending that walking away from her son was a reasonable business decision, all of it crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. Because Aiden was unmistakably hers. He'd inherited her. Sharp jawline, her hazel eyes, even the way she used to tilt her head when she was thinking about something. But he'd also grown up, changed, become his own person in ways she'd never seen. He was taller now, his face losing that toddler roundness and developing the angular features that would probably make him heartbreaker material in another decade or so. The real kicker, though, was what happened next. Aiden tugged on Serena's sleeve, that universal kid signal for "pay attention to me right now." And when she leaned down to hear whatever urgent message he needed to share, he said something that made her laugh. Then, clear as a bell in that way only kids can be, he said, "Mom, can I have some of that cake?" Mom. The word carried across the ballroom like a gunshot. Maybe not everyone heard it, but Eleanor sure as hell did. I watched her face go through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, hurt, anger, something that might have been grief, and finally a kind of cold rage that I remembered from our worst fights. Julian noticed the change in her immediately. He followed her gaze across the room, and when he spotted us, me, Serena, and the son calling another woman Mom, his face went through its own emotional gymnastics routine. Surprise, guilt, something that looked almost like fear, and then that familiar competitive anger that had driven him to steal my wife in the first place. The ballroom suddenly felt way too small, way too warm, and way too full of people who were about to witness a family drama that belonged on daytime television, not at a charity fundraiser. But there was no escaping it now. Eleanor had seen what she'd lost. Julian had seen what he'd helped destroy, and my son was about to learn that sometimes the past comes back to bite you in the most public way possible. The night had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. You know that moment in movies where everything goes quiet right before all hell breaks loose? That's exactly what happened in the seconds after Aiden called Serena Mom loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. The universe held its breath. The champagne glasses seemed to stop clinking, and even the generic jazz band appeared to sense that something was about to go sideways in a spectacular fashion. Eleanor didn't march across that ballroom. She glided, like some kind of designer-clad predator who'd just spotted prey. Julian trailed behind her, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet. Maybe getting a root canal or filing his taxes during an IRS audit. But Eleanor? She was locked and loaded, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the precision of a military drumbeat. I had maybe 30 seconds to prepare for impact, which in hindsight was about 29 seconds too few. Serena noticed the shift in my body language first, probably because I went from relaxed dad at a fancy party to oh shit incoming missile in the span of a heartbeat. Marcus, she asked quietly, following my gaze across the room. What's wrong? Before I could answer, Eleanor materialized beside our table like she'd been teleported there by some vengeful fairy godmother. Up close, the years had been even kinder than I'd first thought. Her skin had that expensive glow that comes from regular spa treatments and stress-free living. Her makeup was flawless, and she radiated the kind of confidence that only comes from having enough money to buy small countries. Hello, Marcus, she said, her voice carrying that perfectly modulated tone she used in boardroom negotiations. Cool, controlled, and sharp enough to cut glass. Eleanor. I stood up because my mother had raised me to have manners, even when facing down ex-wives who'd nuked my life from orbit. Julian. My brother had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a kid who'd been caught stealing cookies. He'd filled out since I'd seen him last. Success apparently agreed with him. But right now he looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest table and hide until the whole situation blew over. Aiden, bless his oblivious 6-year-old heart, looked up from his coloring with the kind of polite curiosity kids reserve for random adults who interrupt their activities. Hi, he said brightly, because Serena had taught him that politeness was never wrong, even when dealing with strangers at boring grown-up parties. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat like she'd been punched. She stared at Aiden with an intensity that was probably making him uncomfortable, though he was too well-mannered to say anything about it. Her hands were shaking slightly, barely noticeable unless you'd been married to her for years and learned to read the signs of Eleanor Whitman losing her famous composure. He's gotten so big, she whispered, and for just a moment, the CEO mask slipped enough to show something almost human underneath. That's what happens when kids grow up, I said, probably sharper than necessary, but I was running on adrenaline and protective instincts. Time doesn't stop just because you're not around to see it. Serena placed a gentle hand on Aiden's shoulder, a gesture so natural and maternal that it probably felt like another slap to Eleanor's face. Aiden, sweetie, why don't you see if you can find some more of those little sandwiches you liked? Smart woman, my Serena. Getting him away from whatever was about to happen. Can I bring you some too, Mom? Aiden asked, and I swear the temperature in the ballroom dropped about 10 degrees. Eleanor's face went through a series of expressions that would have been fascinating if they weren't so devastating. Shock, pain, anger, and something that looked dangerously close to rage all flashed across her features in rapid succession. He calls her Mom? The words came out strangled, like someone was squeezing her throat. Yeah, I said, meeting her furious stare head-on. He does. Has for about 2 years now. How dare you? She hissed, her voice low enough that we wouldn't cause a scene, but venomous enough to strip paint. How dare you let him call her that? That's when something inside me snapped. For years of playing the understanding ex-husband, for years of taking the high road, for years of explaining to my son why Mommy lived somewhere else now, all of it evaporated in the face of her indignation. How dare I? I stepped closer, close enough to see the fury blazing in those hazel eyes Aiden had inherited. You walked away, Eleanor. You signed those papers, packed your bags, and left without looking back. You chose Julian. You chose your empire. You chose everything except your son. I thought, she started, but I wasn't done. You thought what? That he'd just wait around for you to decide you wanted to be a mother again? That he'd keep a space in his heart empty just in case you got tired of playing house with my brother? Julian finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. Marcus, maybe we should. Shut up, Julian. I didn't even look at him. You lost the right to have opinions about my family when you decided to become a homewrecker. Eleanor's composure cracked completely. She's not his mother. I am. I carried him for 9 months. I gave birth to him. You left him. The words came out flat, final, carrying the weight of 4 years' worth of bedtime stories, fevered nights, scraped knees, and proud moments she'd missed. Serena was there when he had nightmares. She taught him to ride a bike, helped him with his first day of school, sang him to sleep when he was sick. She earned the right to be called Mom. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, ruining her perfect makeup and probably staining her designer dress. I never meant for this to happen. I thought it would be better for everyone if I made a clean break. Better for everyone. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Better for who, Eleanor? Not for Aiden, who cried himself to sleep asking where Mommy went. Not for me, who had to figure out how to explain to a 2-year-old why his mother disappeared. And definitely not better for you, standing here 4 years later realizing what you threw away. Serena returned to the table with Aiden in tow, both of them carrying small plates loaded with fancy hors d'oeuvres. The sight of them together, my son chattering happily to the woman who'd stepped up when his biological mother stepped out, seemed to hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Marcus, Serena said quietly, reading the situation with the kind of emotional intelligence that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. Maybe we should go. Eleanor turned that tear-streaked gaze on Serena, and I saw something shift in her expression. The rage was still there, but it was joined by something else, a kind of desperate recognition of what she was up against. You're her, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're Serena Clark. Serena nodded calmly. I am. My business rival. In business, yes. But this isn't about business, is it? And that's when Eleanor really lost it. Nothing ruins your morning coffee quite like opening your front door to find a process server standing there with a smile that says, "Congratulations, your life is about to get complicated." 3 days after the charity gala disaster, that's exactly what greeted me at 7 a.m. sharp. Some kid who barely looked old enough to drive, clutching an official-looking envelope like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Marcus Hale? He asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. Depends on what's in the envelope, I said, but we both knew I was going to take it anyway. Custody petition. Have a great day, sir. And just like that, Eleanor was back in our lives with the subtlety of a freight train loaded with legal documents. I stood in my doorway, still wearing yesterday's t-shirt and holding papers that could potentially rip my son away from the only stable home he'd ever known, while Aiden ate cereal at the kitchen table and asked if we could go to the park later. The petition was everything I'd expected from Eleanor. Thorough, expensive, and completely ruthless. Her legal team had done their homework, documenting every advantage she could claim. Her income, her resources, her biological connection to Aiden, even her goddamn stock portfolio. They'd painted a picture of a successful businesswoman who'd made a temporary difficult decision for the benefit of all parties involved and was now ready to provide the stability and opportunities that Aiden deserved. What they conveniently left out was the part where she'd walked away without looking back for 4 years. Serena found me at my kitchen table 2 hours later, still staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust if I concentrated hard enough. She'd used her spare key, something that felt incredibly domestic and normal until I realized it might be used against us in court. Cohabitation without marriage, I said without looking up. Paragraph 14, subsection C. Apparently, our living situation is potentially confusing for the minor child. Marcus. She sat down next to me, her hand covering mine. We knew this might happen. Did we? Did we really? I laughed, but it came out bitter. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, Eleanor would have enough decency to leave us alone. Stupid me, right? The next few weeks were a masterclass in how money can complicate everything. Eleanor's legal team started sniffing around our life like bloodhounds, requesting school records, medical files, financial statements, anything they could use to build their case. They interviewed Aiden's teachers, his daycare providers, even Mrs. Turner, though she told them exactly where they could stick their questions about my parenting abilities. The worst part was having to explain it all to Aiden without scaring him. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the woman he barely remembers as Mommy wants to take him away from the only family he's ever really known. How do you prepare a kid for the possibility that everything might change without making him feel like it's somehow his fault? "Am I in trouble, Daddy?" he asked one night after a particularly stressful phone call with my lawyer. "Yeah, I'd had to get one of those, which was about as much fun as it sounds." "No, buddy, you're not in trouble. Some grown-ups are just having a disagreement about some boring stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Aiden knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't put his finger on what. He started having nightmares again, something he hadn't done since he was 3. He'd wake up calling for Serena, and she'd be there every time, reading him stories until he fell back asleep. The court-appointed child psychologist was a pleasant surprise. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every type of custody battle imaginable. She spent 3 separate sessions with Aiden, just the 2 of them, while I paced the waiting room like an expectant father. "He's a well-adjusted child," she told me after the final session. "Happy, secure, clearly bonded with both you and Ms. Clark. He talks about his routine, his friends, his school. He feels safe." "And Eleanor?" Dr. Martinez's expression was carefully neutral. "He remembers her, but as someone from his past rather than an active part of his life. When I asked him about his family, he mentioned you, Ms. Clark, Mrs. Turner from across the street, and his goldfish. Ms. Whitman didn't come up until I specifically asked about her." The day of the custody hearing felt like walking into battle armed with nothing but good intentions and a prayer. Eleanor had spared no expense. Her legal team looked like they'd stepped out of a John Grisham novel, all expensive suits and leather briefcases. My lawyer, Dave Kowalski, was a decent guy who'd handle my divorce, but he looked like a neighborhood mechanic next to Eleanor's corporate sharks. Eleanor herself was dressed for war in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car, her hair pulled back in a style that screamed serious professional woman who just wants her son back. She'd even toned down her usual makeup, going for the concerned mother look instead of her typical CEO power face. The hearing was everything I'd feared it would be. Eleanor's team painted her as a devoted mother who'd made a difficult but necessary decision to step away temporarily while she built the financial security to provide Aiden with every possible advantage. They had charts showing her income versus mine, photographs of the house she'd bought, complete with a bedroom already decorated for a 6-year-old boy, and testimonials from character witnesses who'd probably never seen Eleanor interact with a child. They made me sound like a well-meaning but limited single father who was doing his best under difficult circumstances, but couldn't provide the opportunities that Eleanor could offer. They were very careful not to attack Serena directly. Too risky, given her own success and reputation, but they managed to imply that our unmarried cohabitation was somehow unstable and confusing for Aiden. My lawyer did his best with what we had. He talked about consistency, about the bond Aiden had with Serena, about the support system we'd built. He brought in Mrs. Turner, who testified with the righteous fury of a grandmother defending her grandchild. He had statements from Aiden's teachers, his doctors, even the parents of his friends, all talking about what a happy, well-adjusted kid he was. But the moment that changed everything came when Judge Patricia Hendricks asked to speak with Aiden privately. Standard procedure in custody cases involving children old enough to express preferences, but my heart was hammering so hard I was surprised it didn't echo through the courtroom. Everything came down to this: what my 6-year-old son would say when asked about the most important decision of his life. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When the court officer finally brought Aiden back to the courtroom, he looked small and confused in his best dress shirt, clutching the toy car Serena had given him that morning for luck. Judge Hendricks looked at the assembled lawyers, then at Eleanor, then at me and Serena sitting together in the front row. "This case involves a child who has clearly formed strong attachments to his current caregivers over the past 4 years," she began, and I felt Eleanor tense beside Julian like a coiled spring. "However, the court also recognizes the fundamental right of a biological parent to maintain a relationship with their child, provided it serves the child's best interests." Here it came. The moment that would determine whether I'd be tucking Aiden into his own bed tonight or watching Eleanor drive away with him. After reviewing all testimony and speaking with the minor child, this court awards primary physical custody to the father, Marcus Hale, with the current living arrangement to remain unchanged. I didn't hear much after that. Something about visitation rights for Eleanor, about review periods and family therapy, but all I could focus on was the way Aiden's face lit up when he realized he was staying home. Eleanor's composed facade finally cracked completely. She was crying openly now, not caring about her makeup or her reputation or the dozen people watching her world fall apart in real time. But as we left the courthouse, Aiden's hand firmly in mine and Serena's arm around my shoulders, I couldn't help but feel like we'd won a battle, not the war. 3 weeks after the court decision that should have ended everything, Eleanor showed up at Aiden's school like some kind of well-dressed ghost from our past. I got the call from Mrs. Peterson, his first-grade teacher, while I was in the middle of a conference call about quarterly projections. You know, the kind of mind-numbing corporate stuff that suddenly seems incredibly unimportant when someone tells you your ex-wife is lurking around your kid's playground. Mr. Hale, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a woman here who says she's Aiden's mother. She's not on our approved pickup list, and she's been standing by the fence for about 20 minutes now, just watching. My blood went cold faster than a Minnesota lake in January. I'll be right there. I broke at least 7 traffic laws getting to Riverside Elementary, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios like some kind of paranoid highlight reel. Was she planning to snatch him? Had she finally lost it completely and decided to take what she thought was rightfully hers? Court order be damned? By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, I was prepared for everything except what I actually found. Eleanor was standing alone by the chain-link fence that surrounded the playground, wearing a simple black coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but somehow made her look smaller than I'd ever seen her. She wasn't trying to get closer to the school or waving at the kids or doing anything remotely threatening. She was just standing there, watching Aiden play on the monkey bars with the kind of desperate intensity that mothers usually reserve for watching their kids take first steps. The sight of her hit me differently than I'd expected. For years ago, Eleanor walking away had felt like betrayal and abandonment and a dozen other emotions that kept me up at night. 3 weeks ago, in that courtroom, she'd been the enemy trying to tear apart the life we'd built. But standing there by that fence, she just looked broken. I approached her slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal, not because I was afraid she'd hurt me, but because I was afraid any sudden movement might make her fall apart completely. Eleanor. She turned at the sound of my voice, and I saw that she'd been crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears from the courtroom, but the quiet, devastating kind that comes when you realize you've lost something you can never get back. Marcus. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be here. I needed to see him. One more time. On the playground, Aiden was racing around with his best friend Tommy. Both of them engaged in some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and laughing, and the kind of pure joy that only 6-year-olds can access. He was wearing the dinosaur t-shirt Serena had bought him last week and the sneakers that lit up when he ran. Little details that Eleanor had missed, would always miss now. He looks so happy, she said, and there was wonder in her voice, like she was seeing something miraculous. He is happy. I kept my voice neutral, but I was watching her carefully. This is his world, Eleanor. His friends, his teachers, his routine. This is what you would have been taking him away from. She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I know that now. When I saw him at the gala, when I heard him call her mom, it felt like someone had ripped my heart out. I panicked. I thought if I could just get him back, I could fix everything, make up for lost time. Time doesn't work that way. No, she agreed. It doesn't. We stood there in silence for a while, watching our son, my son, really, though she'd always be his biological mother, play with the unconscious confidence of a kid who knew he was loved and safe. A kid who'd never had to worry about being abandoned again because the people raising him had proven they were in it for the long haul. He looks just like me, Eleanor said suddenly, and I could hear the pain in every word. Yeah, I admitted. He does. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. But he's got your intelligence too, and your determination. The good parts of you, Eleanor. The parts that made me fall in love with you in the first place. She turned to look at me then, surprise flickering across her tear-stained face. The good parts. You think I married you just because you were beautiful? You were brilliant, driven, passionate about everything you did. You had this way of making everyone around you want to be better, work harder, dream bigger. Those are the parts of you I see in Aiden every day, but not the part that walks away when things get complicated. The accusation hung between us like smoke from a fire that had burned out years ago. I could have agreed with her, could have let her drown in her guilt and regret. Part of me, the part that remembered those first few months of trying to comfort a toddler who cried for his missing mother, wanted to twist the knife a little deeper. Instead, I found myself saying something I'd never expected to say to Eleanor Whitman. People make mistakes, even big ones. What matters is what they do after they realize they've screwed up. Is that what this is? A mistake? She gestured vaguely toward the playground, toward Aiden, toward the whole mess we'd made of our family. I don't know. Maybe. But you know what? Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Maybe what matters is that Aiden is happy, healthy, and loved. Maybe what matters is that he gets to grow up feeling secure instead of feeling like a prize in some custody battle. Eleanor was quiet for a long time, watching Aiden help Tommy across the monkey bars, cheering when his friend made it all the way to the end. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady for the first time since I'd arrived. I want to say goodbye to him. Properly this time. Would that be okay? I thought about it. Thought about Serena's gentle wisdom, about Mrs. Turner's no-nonsense advice, about all the nights I'd tucked Aiden in and promised him that the adults in his life would make good choices, even when those choices were hard. Yeah, I said finally. I think that would be okay. But not here, not at school. Come to the house this weekend. Saturday afternoon. We'll tell him you're moving far away for work, that you won't be able to see him for a while, but that you want him to know you love him. Will she be there? Serena? Probably. She's part of our family now, Eleanor. She has been for years. Eleanor nodded, accepting what must have felt like another knife to the heart. She's good with him. I could see that, even at the gala. The way he looks at her, trusts her. She's been the mother I should have been. She's been the mother he needed. That's not the same thing, isn't it? I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe there wasn't one. Saturday came with all the uncomfortable tension of a family reunion where half the family isn't speaking to the other half. Eleanor arrived precisely at 2 p.m., carrying a wrapped present and looking like she was attending her own funeral. Serena had taken Aiden to the park for an hour to give me time to prepare him for what was basically going to be a goodbye that he wouldn't fully understand until he was much older. When they got back, Aiden was his usual energetic self, full of stories about the ducks at the pond and the new slide that had been installed since our last visit. He noticed Eleanor immediately, recognition flickering across his face. "Hi," he said politely, the way Serena had taught him to greet all adults. "Hi, Aiden," Eleanor said, kneeling down to his eye level. "I brought you something." The present was perfect, a building set that was exactly the kind of thing a 6-year-old boy would love, age-appropriate, but not too expensive, thoughtful without being overwhelming. Eleanor had clearly put real consideration into it. Maybe the first time she'd ever really thought about what Aiden might want rather than what she thought he should have. "Thank you," Aiden said, his excitement genuine. "Can I build it now?" "Of course. But first, I wanted to talk to you about something important. Is that okay?" What followed was one of the most heartbreaking conversations I'd ever witnessed. Eleanor, with more grace than I'd given her credit for, explained to our 6-year-old son that she was going to be moving far away for work, that she wouldn't be able to visit anymore, but that she would always love him and would always be proud of him. Aiden listened with the serious attention kids give to things they sense are important, even if they don't fully grasp the implications. When Eleanor finished, he thought for a moment, then asked, "Will Daddy and Mum Serena still be here?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice only shaking slightly. "They'll always be here." "Okay," Aiden said, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. "Can we build my present now?" And that was it. No tears, no protests, no dramatic declarations. Just the simple acceptance of a child who'd learned that change was survivable and that the people who mattered would stick around. Eleanor stayed for an hour, helping Aiden with his building set and listening to his chatter about school and friends and all the ordinary details of his ordinary, happy life. When it was time for her to go, she hugged him goodbye with the desperate intensity of someone memorizing a moment. But she kept her promise and didn't make it about her pain. I walked her to her car. Julian was nowhere to be seen, which was probably for the best, and we stood in my driveway for a moment, not quite ready to make this goodbye final. "Marcus," she said, I want you to know that I don't regret loving you. I don't regret marrying you. I just regret not being brave enough to figure out how to balance everything. I regret choosing my pride over my family. I know, I said. And Eleanor, for what it's worth, I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I hope you find happiness. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her since the night she'd told me she was leaving. I think I'm starting to understand that happiness isn't something you find. It's something you build, day by day, with the people who matter. You figured that out. I never did. As her car disappeared down our street, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. Not the bitter satisfaction of victory, not the smug pleasure of being proven right, just peace. Eleanor was gone, but this time it felt final in a way that didn't hurt. I went back inside to find Aiden showing Serena his new building set, chattering excitedly about all the different things he could make with it. When he saw me, he ran over and hugged my legs with the kind of casual affection that meant everything was right in his world. "Daddy, look what I built." And I did look. At his creation, at his proud smile, at Serena watching us both with the kind of love that builds families rather than breaking them apart. We were going to be just fine. 6 months after Eleanor's goodbye, I'm standing in my backyard on a perfect Saturday morning in May, watching my son teach his stepmother how to fly a kite, and thinking about how weird life is. Not weird in a bad way. Weird in that cosmic, everything happens for a reason way that makes you wonder if maybe the universe actually knows what it's doing after all. "Higher, Mom. You gotta run faster." Aiden shouts, his 7-year-old voice carrying across our yard with the kind of authority that only comes from being an expert kite-flying instructor. He's wearing grass-stained shorts and a t-shirt that says "Future Astronaut," a gift from Serena after he announced last month that he wanted to go to Mars when he grows up. Serena is gamely jogging across our lawn, holding the kite string with one hand and laughing so hard she can barely breathe. Her hair has escaped from its ponytail, and she's got that slightly frazzled look that comes from trying to keep up with a kid who has boundless energy and very specific ideas about proper kite-flying technique. "Like this," she calls back, tugging on the string as a gust of wind catches the bright red kite and sends it soaring. "Perfect. You're getting it." Aiden jumps up and down with excitement, his gap-toothed grin wide enough to power a small city. "Dad, did you see? Mom got it really high." "I did see. I see everything these days. Every moment of joy, every casual display of love, every ordinary miracle that makes up our not-so-ordinary family." After years of walking on eggshells, of wondering when the other shoe would drop, of looking over my shoulder waiting for the past to catch up with us, I finally feel like I can just breathe. The kite dips and soars in the spring breeze, its tail streaming behind it like a red ribbon against the blue sky. Serena has stopped running now, just standing in the middle of our yard with the string in her hands, watching Aiden coach her through the subtle art of wind management. "Feel that tug?" she asks him. "That means it wants to go higher, right?" "Yep. Let out more string, but not too much or it'll crash." This is what happiness looks like, I realize. Not the dramatic movie version with swelling orchestral music and sunset kisses, but the ordinary Saturday morning version with grass stains and laughter and a 7-year-old boy who calls his stepmother Mom like it's the most natural thing in the world. Because that's what Serena is now, officially, legally, permanently his stepmother. We got married 3 months ago in a small ceremony in our backyard, with Mrs. Turner crying happy tears in the front row and Aiden serving as both ring bearer and best man. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make the society pages, just family and friends, and the kind of simple vows that actually mean something. "I promise to love your daddy and you for always and always," Serena had whispered to Aiden when she knelt down to give him his ring bearer duties. "Even when I'm grouchy," he'd asked with 7-year-old seriousness. "Especially when you're grouchy. Even when I forget to brush my teeth?" "Even then. But you should still brush your teeth." "Okay. I love you, Mom." Yeah, there wasn't a dry eye in the house after that exchange. The wedding planning had been refreshingly drama-free. No demanding mothers of the bride, no guest list politics, no stress about flower arrangements or seating charts. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of my first marriage, deciding to make it official while surrounded by the people who actually mattered. Julian sent a card, a generic congratulations thing you could buy at any drugstore, signed with just his name. No personal note, no attempt at reconciliation, just acknowledgement that this thing had happened. I threw it away without showing it to Serena. Some bridges are burned for good reason, and I'm okay with that. Eleanor, surprisingly, sent a wedding gift. A beautiful children's book about a little boy who goes on adventures with his family, inscribed simply for Aiden, with love and hopes for a lifetime of happiness. Serena wanted to return it, but I convinced her to keep it. Not for Eleanor's sake, but for Aiden's. Someday he might want to know that his biological mother wished him well, even from a distance. The book sits on his nightstand now, between his collection of dinosaur figures and the framed photo from our wedding day. In the picture, the three of us are laughing about something I can't even remember now. Probably Aiden making some silly face right before the photographer snapped the shot. We look like what we are, a real family, built not on biology or legal documents, but on choice and commitment, and showing up every single day. Dad, Aiden's voice snaps me back to the present. Come help. The wind changed, and now the kite's being weird. I jog over to where he and Serena are standing, their heads tilted back to watch the kite dance erratically in a crosswind. Serena hands me the string with a theatrical sigh of relief. Your turn, hotshot. Apparently, my kite-flying skills need work. You did great. I tell her, accepting the string and feeling the familiar tug of the wind against the kite. Just takes practice. That's what I keep telling her, Aiden says sagely. Mom's still learning, but she's getting better. Right, Mom? Right, kiddo? Good thing I've got an excellent teacher. The kite settles into a steady glide about 50 feet up, its red surface bright against the morning sky. I hand the string back to Aiden, who takes it with the serious concentration of a kid entrusted with important responsibilities. Can we have a picnic out here later? He asks, dividing his attention between kite management and lunch planning. With those sandwiches you make, Mom, and the cookies Mrs. Turner brought over yesterday? Absolutely, Serena says. But first we need to get you cleaned up. You've got grass in your hair and dirt on your face. That's because I'm an outdoor adventurer, Aiden informs her with 7-year-old logic. Outdoor adventurers are supposed to be dirty. Is that a fact? Yep, Dad told me. Serena turns to me with raised eyebrows. Did he now? Hey, I stand by that statement. I say, holding up my hands in mock surrender. Some of life's best adventures involve getting a little dirty. A little dirty, maybe. You look like you've been wrestling with a lawnmower. It's such a normal moment. The kind of gentle family teasing that happens a million times in a million backyards across America every weekend. But for us, for our little reconstructed family, these normal moments feel like victories. Every ordinary Saturday, every bedtime story, every scraped knee kissed better is proof that we made it through the storm and came out stronger on the other side. As I watch Aiden expertly manage the kite while Serena takes pictures with her phone, I think about Eleanor one last time. Not with anger or resentment, but with something approaching gratitude. Because if she hadn't walked away, if she hadn't chosen Julian and her empire over our family, I never would have found this. I never would have learned that love isn't just about passion and grand gestures. It's about showing up, staying put, and building something beautiful out of the pieces left behind. The kite dips suddenly, caught in a downdraft, and Aiden adjusts the string with the kind of instinctive skill that comes from hours of practice. Got it, he calls out triumphantly as the kite recovers and soars upward again. Nice save, buddy, I tell him, ruffling his hair. Mom, did you see that? I totally saved it. I saw, Serena says, and the love in her voice is so clear, so uncomplicated, that it makes my chest tight with gratitude. You're getting really good at this. That's because I practice. And because Dad taught me, and now I'm teaching you. So we're like a kite-flying family. A kite-flying family. Yeah, I can live with that. The sun climbs higher, warming our faces and casting long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, I can hear Mrs. Turner working in her garden, probably getting ready to appear with a plate of fresh cookies and unsolicited but welcome advice about lawn care or child rearing or life in general. This is our life now. Ordinary and extraordinary, simple and complex, built from the ashes of everything that came before. Eleanor will never see moments like this, will never know the sound of Aiden's laughter on a Saturday morning, or watch him master the ancient art of kite flying. That's her loss, her choice, her consequence to live with. As for us, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Higher, Mom, Aiden shouts, and Serena takes the string again, running across our yard with her arms spread wide, chasing the wind and our son's laughter into the bright morning sky. I follow them both, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, I know with absolute certainty that I'm home.